French and German ministers to meet Syria's de facto leader Jean-Noël Barrot and Annalena Baerbock in highest-level visit by major Western powers since rebels toppled Assad. The foreign ministers of France and Germany are to meet Syria's de facto leader, Ahmed al-Shara, in Damascus in the highest-level visit by major Western powers since rebels toppled the regime of President Bashar al-Assad last month. Jean-Noël Barrot and Annalena Baerbock, who arrived separately in the Syrian capital on Friday, would hold talks with the head of the Islamist group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, on behalf of the EU. Their ministries said the diplomats visited Syria's notorious Sednaya prison complex in the morning and also planned to meet representatives of Syrian civil society, as Western allies cautiously opened channels with Syria's new rulers after 13 years of civil war. Baerbock said, "My trip today, together with my French counterpart, and on behalf of the EU, is a clear signal to the Syrians. A new political beginning between Europe and Syria, between Germany and Syria, is possible." She said in a ministry statement that Germany wanted to help Syria become a safe home for all its people and a functioning state, with full control over its territory, adding that despite skepticism about HTS, we must not miss this opportunity to support the Syrian people. Baerbock asked the new rulers to avoid any acts of vengeance against groups within the population, to avoid a long delay before holding elections, and to avert attempts to Islamize the judicial and education systems. In a social media post, Barrot said the two EU heavyweights stand together alongside the Syrian people in all their diversity and want a peaceful transition. In Damascus, he expressed fragile hope for a sovereign, stable, and peaceful Syria. HTS, a Sunni Muslim group previously affiliated with al-Qaeda and Islamic State, is still designated a terrorist organization by numerous national governments, but has assured the international community it aims to govern on behalf of all Syrians, having led the offensive that toppled the Assad family's brutal, decades-long rule. The group's senior figures, who dominate Syria's interim authorities, faced the task of rebuilding the country's decimated state institutions. Major questions remain about whether minority rights in Syria's multi-ethnic society will be properly guaranteed, as well as over continuing foreign influence in a country where states including Turkey and Russia have strong and competing interests. French diplomatic sources said Barrot visited the French embassy, which has been closed since 2012. He met the Syrian staff who maintained the facilities and reaffirmed the need to work towards re-establishing diplomatic representation. Baerbock said she was traveling to Syria with an outstretched hand, as well as clear expectations of the new rulers, who she said would be judged by their actions. "We know where the HTS comes from ideologically, what it has done in the past," she said. "But we also hear and see the desire for moderation and for understanding." Western allies were committed to ensuring Syria's internal affairs were not disrupted by outside influences, she said, and called on Russia to leave its military bases in Syria. Sednaya prison, not far from the capital, was the site of extrajudicial killings, torture, and forced disappearances, and epitomizes the atrocities committed by the Assad regime against its opponents. Stolen skulls and colonial trauma. The Tanzanian searching for ancestral remains. The serene municipality of Songea is steeped in a history of violence. This remote corner of southern Tanzania was a center of resistance to colonial rule during the early 20th century, when German colonialists executed local people and took the remains of many back to Europe for decades. Descendants of some of those who took part in the revolt have fought a largely overlooked campaign for their ancestors' atonement and for the repatriation of their remains. Now a documentary co-directed by the German filmmaker Agnes Lisa Wegner and her Tanzanian counterpart Cici Mlay has shone a delicate light on two families' search for answers. "The question of ancestral remains was not something that I had thought had happened here," said Mlay. "It almost changes your worldview about how you perceive your familial relationships. As people in Songea and other parts of German East Africa, which is made up of areas including present-day Burundi, Rwanda, and mainland Tanzania, waged resistance against German rule. The colonial forces publicly hanged revolters. They later stole the skulls and bones of some people and took them to Germany for experiments in the racist science of phrenology, which was used to support claims of European racial superiority. The movement to repatriate the remains has begun to gain momentum. In the documentary, two families fight bureaucracy as they try to get information and bring back the body parts of their ancestors. Wegner said she had conceived the film in 2015, after an encounter with the South African history professor, Siraj Rasool, who with his colleague Martin Legasig discovered how the remains of the Khoisan couple Klaus and Trui Pinar were stolen in 1909 and taken to Vienna for scientific experiments before being kept in a museum. The remains were repatriated and buried in 2012. The story shook Wegner to her core. Wegner knew immediately that she would have to make the documentary in close collaboration with Tanzanian filmmakers, so in 2021, she reached out to Kijiweni Productions, an independent production house where Mlay works. "We were very much aware of the issue of perspective," she said. "The empty grave follows two families in their complex quest to find and return the remains of their ancestors. In Sunhaya, John Bano, a legal officer, and his wife Cecilia, a primary school history teacher, are looking for the remains of Mbano's great-great-grandfather, Nduna, sub-chief, Sunhaya Mbano, a leader of the Ngoni people. Sunhaya was hanged by German colonialists in 1906 during the Maji-Maji War. After his burial, his head was stolen and taken to Germany. John and Cecilia's search takes them to Berlin, where they meet State Minister Kadia Kuhl and ask for the remains to be found and returned. They visit the archaeological center of the Prussian Cultural Heritage Foundation, which holds thousands of stolen human remains. "Spiritually, the head of the person is everything," John Bano tells Kuhl in the film. "So, when his head was cut off and sent somewhere else, that means the whole community lost its ideas, rituals." Manji chief, Labulu Kaya of the Meru community of northern Tanzania, was hanged by German colonialists in 1900 and his skeleton was taken to Berlin. Kaya's remains were found in 2022 in the U.S., where they had been sent from Berlin. In the documentary, descendants Felix and Ernest Kaya try to navigate the bureaucracy of repatriation and come to terms with their ancestors' history. In one scene, Ernest breaks down when he visits for the first time the tree on which Labulu was hanged. "He suffered. He really suffered. If they did that to him," he says, touching the tree. Mlay said this scene marked a moment when the reality of the work that you're doing meets the camera, and was the most challenging to shoot, as it showed the impact of intergenerational trauma on the descendants. Tanganyika, as mainland Tanzania was known, was under brutal German rule from 1885 to 1918. During that period, the Germans faced dozens of resistance movements against their occupation, the deadliest being the Maji-Maji War from 1905 to 1907, in which 300,000 people are believed to have died. The legacy of German colonialism in Tanganyika hangs like a dark cloud over both countries. The Tanzanian and German governments have been hesitant to investigate and confront it, but as African people have learned more about colonialism and pushed for the return of stolen heritages, the narrative has been changing. Last year, Germany's President Frank-Walter Steinmeier traveled to Sunhaya, where he met descendants of Sunhaya Mbano, publicly apologized for colonial-era crimes, and said his country would seek to find and repatriate the remains of Sunhaya Mbano and others. The documentary premiered at the Berlin International Film Festival in February before being shown at German cinemas. It has also had public screenings in Dar es Salaam, Sunhaya, and Meru, and there are plans for more. "Our priority has been to make sure the film plays in the spaces where the families are from," said Emil Shivji, a co-producer and the founder of Kijiweni Productions. "Not only to pay respect to the families alive and dead, but also to give confidence to more people to come forward and speak about potentially missing ancestors." Wegner said that as a German, and in the context of atrocities committed by Germans, she felt a sense of responsibility throughout the making of the film. "The story had been shoved under the carpet for way too long," she said. For Shivji, who like Mlay was not familiar with the story before the making of the film, learning about the sheer number of skulls and bones that are stored abroad was shocking. "Colonialism had no parameters of justice," he said. "It's hard to go to bed at night knowing this information.